am very glad to have you all back to Breaking the Chains, Healing from Emotional and Physical Abuse. Again, donations help my podcast to grow and generate more fluently. Also, again, I am your host, Kelly. This is Season 10, Episode 2. I want this to be a community of victims and survivors of domestic violence who share his or her pain. Please feel free to comment, subscribe, as we all share our horrific experiences about domestic violence while walking through the healing process, or you have walked through the healing process. And I have a question that I am going to begin with again. And if you would like to comment, please feel free to comment. Does your abuser or its abuser have flying monkeys advocating for him or her? So the title of this episode is called "Why Are Abusers Obsessed with Having Their Flying Monkeys Support?" I am going to restate the definition of a flying monkey or flying monkeys. I go more in depth with the characteristics of a flying monkey or flying monkeys in previous episodes. Please feel free to go back and listen. The definition of a flying monkey or flying monkeys: people who act in favor of an abuser to manipulate, harass, or discredit the abuser's victims and survivors. Abusers utilize their flying monkeys to use the smear campaign against his or her victims or survivors, harass their victims or survivors, and the flying monkeys want to protect their abuser's fake image. Also, the flying monkeys provide validation abusers crave. They facilitate the abuser's ability to manipulate every situation so their abuser seems innocent. Flying monkeys make abusers feel superior to his or her victims or survivors. Flying monkeys prevent abusers from taking responsibility for his or her abusive behaviors. The flying monkeys reinforce their abuser's false narrative, making it easier for abusers to constantly play the victim. Many flying monkeys actually believe he or she is truly helping their abuser from being in distress. For an abuser is exceptional at playing the victim. In reality, his or her victims and survivors are the real victims. The flying monkeys advocate for his or her abuser because they want to stay extremely loyal to him or her. The abuser's flying monkeys do not confront their abuser about his or her abusive actions. For the flying monkeys want to remain neutral, for he or she is not seeking to become the abuser's target. Flying monkeys advocating for the abuser makes them all part of a toxic group, and the abuser is the dominator. This means the abuser is the leader of the flying monkeys. When flying monkeys support their abuser, they suspend his or her own judgment. Flying monkeys will intensify the trauma for the victims and survivors of the abuser. The flying monkeys want to make the victims and survivors of the abuser be isolated from the world. The flying monkeys advocate for the abuser to create doubt and confusion for the victims and survivors. Flying monkeys support their abuser because they have deep psychological needs. Flying monkeys constantly advocating for an abuser reflects his or her psychological needs, such as a sense of belonging, status, inclusion, and perceived safety. Some flying monkeys support their abuser for they are being a trusted confidant, which feeds on the flying monkeys wanting to be extremely important to his or her abuser. Other flying let me restart that. Other flying monkeys advocate for the abuser because of their fear of rejection. The flying monkeys advocate for his or her abuser by gaslighting the victims and survivors. Flying monkeys support the abuser by passing information about their victims and survivors to his or her abuser. The flying monkeys are codependent to their abuser. Codependency means the flying monkeys are serving their abuser so they feel a sense of purpose in their lives. Flying monkeys are in denial about their abuser's toxic actions and the trauma it caused to the abuser's victims and survivors. A majority of abusers are narcissists. The meaning of a narcissist means he or she only cares about his or her needs and wants, and they do not care about who he or she hurts. The abuser is also obsessed with having the flying monkeys support, for it feeds his or her narcissistic supply. So here are the 4 main reasons abusers need their flying monkey support. Number 1, it controls an abuser's false narrative. The abuser's flying monkeys will use the smear campaign to everyone about their abuser's victims and survivors to try to destroy the victims and survivors' reputation. When the flying monkeys have more support from people to vouch for their abuser, the smear campaign and gaslighting tactics will become successful for an abuser's distorted reality. The second main reason an abuser needs their flying monkeys support is an abuser maintains power and control. The flying monkeys consistently defend their abuser's toxic behaviors while using the blame shifting technique towards the abuser's victims and survivors. So, the abuser maintains power and control over his or her victims and survivors. Number 3, to keep the victims and survivors isolated. The flying monkeys constantly use the false narrative about their abuser to try to keep his or her victims and survivors isolated from the world. So the victims and survivors will not share the truth about the horrific events that occurred during the abusive relationship. Number 4, helps an abuser to avoid accountability. When an abuser continues to have the flying monkey's support to use the false narrative to other people while trying to destroy the victim and survivor's reputation, the abuser will not be held accountable for his or her abusive actions. The flying monkeys want their abuser's hands clean from all abusive actions, for it protects the abusers from being responsible for abusing his or her victims and survivors. In conclusion, flying monkeys are usually family members or close friends of the abusers. And flying monkeys can also be a spouse or a girlfriend or boyfriend. The flying monkeys are just people pleasers. A majority of flying monkeys have unresolved trauma as a child or teenager. That is why he or she supports the abuser. Flying monkeys advocate for his or her abusers, for they need his or her approval. Flying monkeys support their abuser to pressure his or her victims or survivors to comply with their demands. Also, the flying monkeys are creating fear and isolation for the victims of their abuser, so the victim will stay with the abuser. Flying monkeys support his or her victims. Hold on, let me go back and restate that. That was false. Flying monkeys support his or her abuser by using the smear campaign against the victims and survivors. It means the flying monkeys are consistently spreading lies and gossip about the abuser's victims and survivors. Abusers utilize their flying monkeys as weapons to target their victims and survivors. The flying monkeys are consistently enabling their abusers' toxic behaviors. Flying monkeys advocate for their abusers by not recognizing that his or her abusive actions are extremely harmful. I'm going to restate that last sentence. Flying monkeys advocate for their abuser by not recognizing that his or her abusive actions are extremely harmful. Again, donations help my podcast to grow and generate more fluently. I am very grateful for each listener and each supporter of my podcast. Have an awesome day.